Welcome to Week 8. Week 8 is our final week in our integral education journey, and I thought it would be nice in Week 8 first to offer a visual aspect of our teaching in addition to the audio sessions we've done. I thought it might be really nice to have a chance to have a visual component. What I really wish, of course, is that we could be gathered together around the room, around a table, and have conversation in the manner of our seminars. It's been so wonderful to hear voices and see written expressions of the work that each one of you is doing. So I wish that we were gathered in one place together, and I'd like to imagine each of you here in this space. I'm here in my school where I teach, and I'm so grateful to have a chance to bring you into this space as we go through this last session and zoom out, take a big look from above at what it is that we've been thinking about on this 8-week-long exploration of integral education. I like to think of integral education as an invitation. As an invitation first to greater wholeness, greater fullness. I like to think of integral education as a way to embrace more of the territory of what's available to us in the realm of teaching and learning. So if we think about it in that context, then we're being invited or asked to look at our edges, to look at the edges of where we are familiar, of where we're comfortable, and then to expand them, to grow into a wider embrace, to grow into a space that brings more perspectives, more possibilities, more ways of seeing and more ways of being into the teaching space that we work with. So integral education is an invitation to a place of greater wholeness. It's an invitation to greater awareness. It's an invitation to bring more discernment to everything that's present when we gather together in an educational endeavor, in an educational setting. When we come together with the express intention of learning and of getting the most out of that learning, we recognize that we need to bring as much awareness as possible to what is in the space, to the dimensions of the individual and the collective. And so when we're bringing an integral awareness to teaching and education, we're being asked to bring the most attention we can to the largest number of elements that are all present in that space. It's also a space of bringing our fullest selves, of bringing our own presence with a level of depth and openness and care, so that we're available to what wants to emerge, to what wants to arise in that space, and so that we can bring all of our own talent and skill and knowledge and thinking and heart to that teaching space, because we've come unencumbered by the weight of what gets in the way of what can keep us from being in that space. So we're asked really to come to integral teaching with a clarity of our own intentions, a clarity of our own commitment. As an invitation, integral education really asks us to come to teaching with a sense of our own engagement with presence, with the self that can show up when we open to possibilities and surrender a bit to that which wants to emerge. It's an invitation to aliveness. It's an invitation to really full engagement. It's an invitation to let go and surrender, even as we take hold of newness that comes up in that space that's being created by being available to whatever we find emerging. So maybe one of the things that's central to an integral practice in teaching, in education, is recognizing that this is sacred work, recognizing the significance of what's before us anytime we enter into a teaching space, recognizing the great, great importance and value of each moment that we have to be in a place of learning, to be in a place of teaching, to be gathered with others in a space of exploration and inquiry. And one of the ways that we can acknowledge that the work is sacred work is by bringing as much awareness to the work as we can. That when we come with all of our attention and care and awareness, when we show up as individuals who recognize the significance of what's before us and honor that space by being as thoughtfully aware of as many dimensions as possible, then we're embodying the kind of presence that really can rise to the calling of what it means to engage with teaching as sacred work, to engage with teaching as a spiritual practice. It's really a matter of clearing away those things that might get in the way of our being with that role as fully and as deeply and as authentically as we can. One of the Friends' testimonies of simplicity really speaks to that aspect of being in direct contact with that which is our own source of inner light, our own source of inspiration. And to be in that space, we need to constantly be checking in with how we are interacting with this role of being in a teaching space, of being an educator, and also of being included as part of the learning that's taking place. So when we come to our teaching with that awareness that we are not only the teacher, but that we are another student in the room, when we come to the teaching with the expectation that it's going to work on us as much as we're in the place of offering something, then we're open to a kind of possibility, a kind of emergent learning that might surprise us, that might actually give us a sense of something new that we maybe hadn't expected, that we couldn't expect because we couldn't envision it until we got there and we showed up and something else showed up in the space. So integral education is this beautiful invitation to not know what might come out of that moment when we step into a seminar or a classroom or any space, to engage it as an experiment. I love to think about education as this big ongoing experiment. I don't know what's going to happen when I embark on an 8-week journey of integral education with a beautiful collective of teachers all over the world. I don't know what might come up. I don't know what we might point to in any class where we have so many questions that we're potentially taking up. And as we gather together and as we deepen the inquiry, none of us can know what might emerge and what we might come across and what we might see. So an integral approach makes room for that. It is a way of making space for that which might show up when we allow our awareness and our presence to deepen the space of inquiry with a not knowing mind. There's a paradox that I would love to bring in that's been important for me in my teaching, And it's a paradox that embraces a polarity spectrum that runs along a line of how we are in relationship to the particular context of teaching that we find ourselves in. And it's the paradox of acceptance, of complete and total acceptance, and also of longing for change, longing for growth, longing for evolution, longing for things to be even better. And in that paradox, we're actually constantly confronting a tension between the space where we can sit with things as they are and take the most and make the most of things exactly as they are, and really come from a place of gratitude and appreciation for all that is present in whatever space we're working with, but also at the same time becoming from a place of stretching, becoming from a place of wanting to make it even better, of raising the bar, of increasing our expectations around what's possible, and stretching into something that would ask more of what we're doing and of what's coming out of that educational experience. So the reason it's a polarity spectrum is in part because we can get grounded at one end or the other of that spectrum. We can be coming from a place all the time of just acceptance of things as they are, without that striving for stretching, without that reaching for the kind of change that allows things to transform and grow and evolve in our own practice, in our students, in the community or the institution or the school that we're a part of. So if we get too centered in a place of pure acceptance, in a place of simply saying, this is how it is, this is how it's going to be, then we're missing out on a chance to enact productive change, to support transformative growth. So that end of the spectrum of being purely in a place of acceptance and gratitude is perhaps missing an opportunity. At the other end of the spectrum, if we're fully centered in a space of always stretching for differentness, if we always are saying that this needs to change, we're missing out on some of what's absolutely perfect and beautiful about the way things are. So we can get lost a little bit in a sense of dissatisfaction, in a sense of things needing to be different, because we're holding that vision of change, we're holding this great sense of the evolutionary possibility of where things could go. But if we're oriented solely in that perspective all the time, then we might fail to see what's right before us in this moment, in something that's offered by the students we're working with, in something that's offered by the questions that come up. So there's a beautiful paradox or tension between the place of acceptance and seeing things as being perfect just as they are, and the place of reaching and stretching for something that is not yet embodied, that wants to emerge and that is waiting for us to help to catalyze its emergence. So I like that framing as a way of having a foot in both of those places and simultaneously feeling this profound gratitude for what we have, for how things are, for the amazing journey we've taken to be where we are, for that which is offered by our students in the very moment that they find themselves at this particular point in their development, and to really appreciate fully, with total joy and absolute embrace, the way that things show up. And also, right alongside that, to know that we are on a journey together with our students, with our community, with the whole planet, that is asking us to not settle, but to continue to stretch, to continue to reach for something that can be so much more. I don't think we've begun to find the full possibilities and the full depth of what education can be when we're taking advantage of all of human potential. I don't think that we've yet begun to engage all of the dimensions of learning, all of the ways that we can come to meet each other and know each other and inspire each other and have deep, meaningful conversations that change the way we see ourselves and change the way that we understand our place in the universe. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that ongoing unfolding of possibility in educational settings. And to me, this course has been about beginning to inquire more deeply into what those can look like. So it would be nice to consider an evolutionary context. As we come to this place where we've been journeying together over these weeks, it would be exciting to think about the work we're doing in the largest possible context, in a truly evolutionary context that honors the whole journey that has brought us to this moment, and also looks forward to where we might go from here, to what might lie ahead for us, and maybe to see if evolution itself has something to teach us about evolution. What does evolution have to teach us about evolution? Or what teachings might there be in this beautiful idea of evolution that we might look to for some helpful framing of where things might go and how we can be evolutionaries in our role as educators? Carter Phipps has written a beautiful book called Evolutionaries, and it's a wonderful application of this great idea, this amazingly significant idea of what evolution is and what evolution can mean, applied across a whole spectrum that goes way beyond biological evolution of species diversity. And I like to bring that evolutionary context in here at this moment in our journey together, in part because I teach evolution and I love the idea, but in part because I think it's one of the most meaningful and significant frameworks we can hold for this place where we find ourselves, right in the middle of now, right in the middle of this moment, a moment that has come about because of millions of years that have gone before, and a moment that is on its way to becoming so much more, and an unfolding that we can only begin to imagine, but that we ourselves are a part of, and that we ourselves are helping to create. So let's think about that a little bit. Let's think a little bit about what evolution might have to teach us about evolution, about the evolution of education, about the evolution of our own teaching, and the ways that we might move forward together. Well, first, I think that evolution points to the possibility of change that moves from a level of form into new complexity that is beyond our wildest imagination. That if we look at the story of the evolutionary unfolding of pattern and complexity in the universe, one thing that we can learn is that at any stage on the evolutionary journey, that which lies ahead is unthinkably, unimaginably more complex, more intricate than that which we can know at any one stage. That over and over again, evolution has unveiled new ways of being that would have been truly inconceivable to that stage that existed before the evolutionary leap or transformation. And in evolution, those incredible leaps of complexity are guided often by the most simple principles or drivers. That the core drivers of evolutionary change can be really, really simple. They can be a principle that's as fundamental and simple as gravity. They can be a principle that's as fundamentally simple as the attraction of one thing for another, guided by a simple force, like gravitational attraction, or the attraction between charges. And that simple principle or driver held over a span of time can bring about complexity of form and possibility that's really astonishing to behold. So let's take that idea for just a second. The idea of a simple principle, a simple driver being able to catalyze the unfolding of intricacy and complexity, of beautiful forms that are really coming into existence through something quite simple. So in the case of gravity, we have this amazing attraction of one mass for another. It's a simple thing and something we still don't understand, but that masses attract masses is a principle that has drawn together clouds of gas that become stars and galaxies and nebulae that rotate around great gravitational centers, that the planet under our feet and the beautiful jewels of light in the night sky are really forms that owe their existence to something so simple, the attraction of mass for mass, and that principle has given us the very ground on which greater intricacy and form can come into being. If we think about the attraction of one charge for another, and we think about the possibility of simply electrons being held around protons and the attraction between these particles, we find that molecules have come into existence on the basis of that very, very simple property, that are molecules of such profound beauty and form and function that it's hard to imagine that they can be explained simply on the basis of this core principle of attraction of one atom's nucleus for another atom's electrons. Things that are beautiful colors of pigments that give us the leaves that are changing from green to gold in the fall, molecules that are responsible for our own capacity to feel emotions and for our own vision of those colors and our excitement and awe, mediated by these beautiful forms that are chemical forms and molecular forms that come into existence again all through this really simple principle. So I want to extend that thinking and imagine what is possible when the core principles for evolution become principles that have come into existence along with our conscious selves. That is, as matter and form has taken up this beautiful existence as conscious beings, as the most intricate collection of matter that we've ever come to know in the universe. That is the being that's guided by a thoughtful mind which is self-aware and self-reflective. We have the possibility of evolution being driven by principles that in their own simplicity might create forms that are even now unimaginable to us. So imagine for a minute that the driving principle became awareness, conscious awareness. If the driving principle became awareness and integrity and commitment and discernment, just those four simple principles, if we said, what might be possible in the evolution of education, in the evolution of our systems and structures and of our ways of being with each other, if the guiding principles were simply those: consciousness and our awareness, integrity, discernment, and commitment? Well, I think that over time we'll find that something might come into existence that is truly beyond our current capacity to imagine, but something so beautiful and something so powerful that we need to be there to help its emergence. So what happens when our educational culture is actually held in conditions of great care, of great awareness, and of commitment and discernment? Well, it may be that we don't have to create all the structures, that we don't have to be in the role of inventing an educational possibility, but that perhaps part of our role is to stand as these pillars of possibility and to bring forward our own sense of commitment and engagement and allow the evolutionary unfolding to take place through us and in the context of the conditions that we help to create. So sometimes we can feel overwhelmed by the need to imagine and envision and even enact and create all of the possibilities that we know are out there, all the possibilities that we really have in our heart as a sense of what we would like to see emerge in that vision of an educational setting that is really being everything that it could be. But maybe another way to think about it is that we simply need to show up with that commitment to being our best selves, show up with that commitment to bringing all of our awareness and to opening up the space for that continuing evolution to take place, that is going to take place when those drivers are allowed to enact the new structures, the new possibilities that will come forward in an evolutionary journey that's going to unfold when the conditions allow it to. So I like that sense of being able to imagine our role as being enactors, but also as being those who create conditions for the evolutionary unfolding to continue. I think about the biodiversity on the planet and about the extraordinary complexity of forms of life that have come into existence without their own participatory intention. I think about the work I'm doing right now with my students on pollination relationships and the most intricate, beautiful flower forms that include scented, colored, nectar-giving floral structures that are uniquely interdependent with pollinators that are engaging sophisticated behaviors both to feed themselves and to assist in the reproductive possibility of these flowering plants. And that these forms have come into existence to a degree of intricacy and complexity that's almost impossible to imagine. But all of it has been possible because of a few simple guiding drivers that have allowed this evolution to create beautiful structures that function in a way that is almost beyond our comprehension and have been set into motion by a process over time that really is grounded in these few simple core principles. So the second thing that I think evolution may have to teach us about evolution has to do with energy. And that image of a beautiful hummingbird nectaring at an aloe flower reminds me of that sense of working with energy. And I think the second thing that evolution has to teach us about evolution is that the flourishing of an organismal form is intimately tied to its successful directing of energy to the possible outcomes and to the possible development that it is engaged in. That is to say that energy is core to the story of productive growth and development, and that those forms that are successful in the ways that they work with energy and direct energy into growth and development have the greatest unfolding take place. Currents of energy are flowing all around us all the time. If we look outside our window and we see the sunlight raining down on the leaves, those leaves are able to direct this electromagnetic vibration of colored energy into sugars and proteins and oils that then are available for higher possibilities. And so our success in working with the currents of energy that are around us is going to determine the higher order possibilities that we can actually manifest. And if that's true for a leaf in a tree, and if that's true for the ways that the energy we take in endows us with capacities to dance and run and think and paint and write, it's also true in the educational settings where we're teaching. So we might approach our integral perspective on teaching as a way of dancing with the energy that's available to us and directing that energy into its highest potentials. And that takes a lot of awareness and commitment as well. But there's a recognition there that any time a group of us comes together, once again with this express purpose of being in a space with a mission, and that mission being our own continuing learning, our greatest possible discovery, when we come together with the express purpose of growth, of embracing new aspects in ourselves, new ways of understanding, then we realize that we're going to need to find the energy and use the energy that that teaching and learning will require. So when we imagine our relationship to energy, we're thinking not only about the energy in the collective, the energy of the students, the energy of the community, the energy of the institution, but also about our own energy. We're thinking about what it takes to sustain our own productive, energetic engagement with this work. I know that when a group of my students, especially my 14-year-old students, come into the classroom with this incredible energy and presence and excitement and enthusiasm, that there's something palpable in the room that's there to work with, and that the success that we will have on any given day in taking that energy and translating it into learning, into discovery, into inspiration, into new ideas, new perspectives, is really an art. You know, there's an art to working with energy, both physical energy and subtle energy, and taking that which is available and steering it into this beautiful unfolding of discovery, of learning, of possibility. So I think that there's a beautiful teaching there that evolution has to offer us, that in fact those forms that are most successful in directing the energy currents that are available to them into growth and development tend to be those forms that rise into the greatest intricacy and complexity and new ways of being. So we could take that energetic perspective on the work we're doing and recognize also that our own energy that we bring and our own ability to maintain our inner sources of energy and our inner sources, the spark of commitment, the spark of our own belief in possibility, are really going to be important in that which we bring forward. Maybe you could think of this role in a way as being directors of energy, that partly what we're doing is we're tapping into something that's already present and helping to steer it, helping to direct it, helping it to take shape, giving it shape, but maybe allowing it to take the shape that it wants to take in the particular context that we find ourselves. The energy is there. What it becomes and how it's translated into insight, into growth, into development, into new sophisticated ways of thinking, seeing, and being, that's the beautiful question. What is it going to take to tap into this energy and direct it into those possibilities? So I like drawing that lesson from the image of the hummingbird nectaring at the flower, or the image of the dancer who is using this incredible chemical energy to form patterns of movement that really hold us in awe and appreciation for possibility. We're doing that dance as well, but we're doing that dance in the place of teaching, in the place of listening, in the place of deepening relationship with students and deepening our relationship to the role that we ourselves are taking up. What does evolution have to teach us about evolution in education? Well, the third lesson that I've found in looking out at the world of form and the world of ecology is that the more participants there are in a collective, the more ways of being there are, so that complexity is actually supported by more participants. So when we think about an environment that's very extreme or very harsh, I often think of the far, far north, the Arctic, or I think of the South Pole and the Antarctic. These environments actually are very challenging for living forms to thrive. And there's a limited number of ways that organisms can be successful in those extremely difficult conditions. And yet even there, we can be astonished by the success that organisms have had in finding ways to solve the problems of existence in those extreme conditions. But because there's a limited number of ways to be, and a limited number of participants, a limited number of organisms that can be in that space, the possibilities and the complexity are constrained. They're constrained by the fact that there can only be so many players in the system. But when we see a space where there are lots of ways to be, in part because there's lots of energy available, there are lots of perspectives, there are lots of ways to solve a problem, that these different ways being simultaneously present actually increase the evolutionary possibility of intricacy and complexity. So if we think about not the extremes of the Arctic or the Antarctic or of the desert, but we think about the fertile richness of the tropical forest, of the cloud forest or the rainforest, what we find is that when there are more ways of being, there are greater degrees of complexity and sophistication that can emerge because of the relationships between these ways of being. So the interdependency of differentness actually creates more possibility, more interdependent possibility. And then the intricacy and the sophistication that emerges in those settings is orders of magnitude greater because of the participation of more ways of seeing and being. So if we use that idea, or if we use that teaching from the evolutionary and ecological context, and we say, what does that have to tell us about our teaching spaces? What does that have to tell us about an educational setting? It perhaps is the suggestion that as we allow more ways of seeing, doing, and being into the teaching space, into the learning space, that the interplay and the interrelationships between those ways of seeing and being actually provide the context for greater sophistication and complexity to emerge. So by allowing more possibilities into the space, we allow more higher order meaning to emerge because of the possibilities of relatedness, interrelatedness, cross-pollination, interdisciplinary perspectives, new ways that each thing possibly informs and adds to the other in a way that's exponentially greater than the sum of the parts. So there's something about opening the space of the learning realm to include more possibilities, to include more perspectives, to include more types, to include more lines of learning, to include more dimensions in the ways that all the quadrants are welcomed and are embraced. There's something about that approach that actually allows an unfolding of something more intricate, of something that holds more, of something that can reveal more, of something that can allow a greater possibility to emerge. So I like that aspect of drawing from the ecologies of interdependence as an inspiration for thinking about the ecologies of perspectives, thinking, ideas, and connectedness in our learning spaces. So those are three things that I imagine being significant in drawing from evolution some of the teachings or lessons that it can offer us when we think about an evolutionary context for our own teaching. First, that possibility of knowing that intricacy and form and beauty of unparalleled, unimaginable, astonishing complexity can arise in response to a few very simple principles or drivers, or a few very core concepts that we hold to over time. And that because of that, we can hold to those spaces of awareness and discernment and commitment and compassion, and know that in those spaces something will unfold and evolve simply because we're creating the conditions for it. And second, that sense that energy is a critical component of what we're doing and what we're working with. And that it's perhaps our ability to work with the currents of energy that are always around us, to work with directing them towards growth and development, and being open to the changes that that energy might bring us to, that allows this possibility to unfold in the fullest ways that it can. And then third, that recognition that more ways of being and seeing beget even more ways of seeing and being, and still greater complexity that can emerge out of the interdependence and interrelationship of ideas, of thoughts, of selves, of collectives. That collectives meeting collectives actually allows a greater possibility in how we understand each other, and how we understand what there is to know or learn or see or be in the universe that we are becoming. There's another aspect of an evolutionary context that I'd like to bring forward, and that is our own evolution, and the fact that each of us is involved in a personal journey in our teaching work, that we are not static, that we are not the same from day to day and from year to year. This engagement with teaching is an opportunity for us to grow into ourselves ever more fully, that we're a part of the experiment, we are the experiment, we're it, that we are engaged in a process of discovering ever more deeply who we are by being open to the learning that is found in the teaching. This teaching role is something that does not leave us out of the equation of being learners, of being in a space of our own discovery, discovering more about who we are, how we show up in this way as educators. So I like to think about the evolutionary context also in terms of our own unfolding and our own evolution. I know for myself, it's been true that being a teacher, being engaged in education over a span of several decades, has been a profound opportunity to be a learner, to be a student, to discover day after day and week after week more of who I am, of what happens when a situation arises that I've never encountered, and that possibility of learning something about not only education, but about my own sense of self, of who I am in each different moment, and of how we can grow in the place of being educators. I think that teaching is a profoundly influential space of self-discovery, of learning, in part because it asks so much of us. It requires so much psychic energy. It requires so much commitment, so much dedication, so much time. And so I think it's a beautiful space to be engaged in our own growth in our own learning. So we're not left out of the learning, so that we ourselves, with our students, are a part of this space of discovery, of unfolding possibility. And I've enjoyed that aspect of continuing to evolve as a teacher and continuing to grow in my own sense of what it is I'm trying to do, or what it is that we are trying to do, or how I approach this very act of educating, and how that shifts and changes over the years of our work in an educational setting. So I think that participating in the evolutionary context of being an educator includes opening ourselves up to this continuing unfolding in how we go about it, in what we ourselves are seeing, in what we ourselves are doing, and how we practice. That's a dynamic, changing, and ever-evolving aspect of what we do. I think many of us were drawn to teaching in part because we want to use our life energy to make a difference. We want to use our conscious awareness and our energy to make a positive difference in the world. And yet, we're also simply being present to that which is, moment by moment. So we certainly have a place of great possibility in every educational setting. And we certainly have been called to step into that with as much awareness as we can. And I think that it's a beautiful thing to behold how many teachers feel so much heart. They feel so drawn to this space of being in the place of creating conditions for this possibility of growth in their students, and also for this possibility of growth in themselves. So I appreciate that aspect of what being an integral educator means, in the way that we are awake and the way we're alive to the possibilities, not only in the educational setting where we find ourselves, but to the possibilities in ourselves, that we ourselves are constantly on the journey of change and of evolving. I think we also realize that we are at a very particular moment in human history, and that we can look around and see systems that are breaking under the weight of their own enormity. We see systems that are struggling for a new way of seeing the future and a new way of moving forward. And it feels to me like education is going to be an important part of that discovery of new systems, new ways of being, new ways of connecting with each other, and using those connections in service of the unfolding of complexity and the unfolding of our own shared future. We're educators in so many ways. You know, we really are teachers in so many different contexts, and so some of us are teaching in a university, in a classroom, in a secondary school. Some of us are teachers in programs that are seminars or in online courses. Some of us are homeschooling teachers who are working with our children in a learning space. Some are working with early childhood education. We have so many teaching contexts as educators, but I think it's also worth acknowledging that throughout the span of our lives, we're so often engaged in teaching something small, or in offering something just in our very being that is itself a teaching. So I like to think also about all of the ways that in the whole span of our life that we may be called on to be educators, to be teachers, or to be convening learning spaces, or to be pointing to learning moments that are possible. So we don't have to think of our educating role only in the formal context of when we're in a classroom, or when we are actually in a teaching space that's recognized as a space that's devoted to education. But at every moment, there's a possibility that we can awaken to the learning that might be possible in each encounter, each time that we step into a place of newness, there's a possibility of being educated and being educators. There's so many ways that that might show up. I remember just in this last year, I've had the opportunity to be a teacher in my son's learning to drive. And I can tell you that that kind of teaching asks us to be in a place of surrender. It asks us to be open, to be thoughtful, to be aware, to be conscious of just what it is that we're trying to offer as a perspective. And it asks us also to be profoundly humble as we watch somebody else try something out, as we create the context for someone to explore something, as we point to possibilities of safety, of perspectives, of things to pay attention to be aware of. So that's an educating role. It's one that many people have found to be fascinating in the ways that we're sharing a sense of our own experience and our skill and letting someone else try that out and see it in their own way. We also can imagine ways that we might be teachers simply in the kinds of conversations we have. That there are times where in sharing perspectives and in asking questions that we're serving in a role of helping to create deeper inquiry, of helping to think about how we listen to each other, about how we hear each other, about what we pay attention to. So that is a possibility that's present in so many different contexts that aren't formal schooling situations, but really allow us to bring that same kind of awareness and openness to being in a space of learning all through the span of our existence. And that really, for me, awakens a much deeper sense of what it means to be an educator, of what it means to be open to the places of teaching and learning through every day, wherever we go, wherever we are. I'm really grateful to have had this chance to explore together a whole series of questions about what integral education could look like, about what it means to ask deep questions about the possibilities in education. Think about all of the ways that we ourselves need to be attentive to who we are, to what our own blind spots might be, to what our own best self might look like, to what our own current growing edges are. It's also been really, for me, an amazing experience to try to articulate things that simply are in my own core of working with students over many years, and trying to imagine how can we share with each other what we've discovered and what we've found and what we've enjoyed and what we've learned and where we've struggled and what we've stumbled on. I've enjoyed very much the voices that have come forward in our calls. I've enjoyed so much the images of each of you in the different settings where you are all across the world. So I'm grateful for the ways that we can connect around this shared sense of meaning and this shared sense of mission and this shared sense of desire to be in a place of open experience, be in a place of stretching and of reaching and of learning. And it's been a real joy to do that in this course. I've loved thinking about when things go wrong. I've loved thinking about how we make mistakes and how we try to learn from those mistakes. I've loved thinking about community and about how much is present in any gathered group. The gift of being in a space with other individuals and meeting each other in the intention of listening and hearing, of asking questions, and of seeing the different ways that people answer those questions, or the different perspectives that people can bring or point to. I've loved thinking about wholeness and how, in fact, there's a possibility of reaching out from whatever subject that we might be exploring to a greater wholeness where that subject becomes the gateway to embrace everything, to embrace all of the connectedness, all of the relationships. You know, behind me are these images of moths and caterpillars, and my research in the developmental biology of larval stages of moths and butterflies is this tiny, esoteric, biological aspect of insect life histories. But to me, it's also an expression of so many things that it connects to, that it points to. Evolution, metamorphosis, detail, intricacy, relationship, change. It's a beautiful story, and it's a story that also asks us to pay attention to what we value, and to pay attention to what we notice, and to pay attention to how we can ask questions that we might be able to answer, and how we can wonder about things where we don't even know how to begin to get the answers to the questions we might be holding, and the visions we might imagine about how things are and how things could be. So I've enjoyed that aspect of thinking about wholeness and how everything is the doorway to anything, and anything is the gateway to everything, and how we can zoom out from the specific details to embrace the vastness of the territory of all of the knowing and all of the thinking and all of the learning. I've enjoyed very much thinking also about assessment and thinking about meaning and how we find meaning and make things that we're learning meaningful to everyone who's participating, and also how we create experiences that ask for a demonstration of what has been meaningful and how it has been understood, and all the possibility of creating meaningful assessments that not only give us information about how our students are understanding, or how our teaching is landing, or what's being heard and what's working, but also how the assessments can themselves become beautiful learning experiences, how participating in the assessment leads us to discover new insights about what it is we've been thinking about. So I've enjoyed all of those different pieces of this journey that we've been sharing together. And I think mostly I've enjoyed becoming aware of all of the points of learning that are simultaneously present on the planet, and knowing that each one of you is engaging an educational practice in such a unique setting and context, and showing up the way that you show up, and with your students, with your children, with the adults that you work with, that each of you is creating another aspect of possibility and embodying another way of being a gifted, thoughtful, and profoundly influential teacher in the work that you do, knowing also that that's continuing to grow and change, and that each of us is reaching to stretch ourselves and to stretch into all of that possibility. So I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be in this place together. I'm filled with gratitude. I'm filled with appreciation for the spaces that we've created, for the questions that we've brought up, for the territory that we've pointed to. And I hope that it's been an enjoyable experience and a meaningful experience for each of you. I hope it's been provocative. I hope that it's brought up new ideas and new possibilities. I hope it's raised a lot of questions, and that you'll continue to engage in thinking about thinking and thinking about discovering. So thank you for taking this journey together, for sharing so much of yourselves and your practices with all of us. Please stay in touch. Please continue to, let us know what you're discovering and what you're finding, and how this course has been important to you, or what's been of value to you. I'm grateful for all your feedback, and look forward to hearing again from you in the calls that are still coming up. Take good care. Thank you for the work that you do, and for all that you bring into the world with your unique gifts. Enjoy Good luck, take care, be well, bye-bye.